Dames en heren. Dames en heren, mijn naam is Maarten Ascher. Ik ben directeur van de Atheneumboekhandel. And I'm very pleased to welcome you also on behalf of Ms. Linda Baus, the director of FELIXMERITIS, and her colleagues, our partner in organizing this event. We could have filled an even much bigger hall than this one. So many were the applications for an admission ticket over the past few weeks. But we wanted to stick to this venue, ladies and gentlemen, which without doubt is the most appropriate building in Amsterdam for the present evening. I will explain this in a moment. My warmest, I might almost say my most radical words of welcome go to Professor Jonathan Israel and to Dr. Philipp Blom, who have kindly accepted our invitation to act as the protagonists of our program. I would like to ask you to switch off your mobile phone and to greet with a warm applause, please, our first speaker and guest of honor, ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan Israel.
Freedom of thought, freedom of press, freedom of expression, freedom of, and when I say freedom of the press, I'm not talking about a slogan, such as, some countries might say, well, we have freedom of the press here. But in fact, if you criticize something that's by tradition very deeply entrenched and about which there's much sensitivity, I mean, maybe even in Holland there are certain things, I won't mention what they are, but there are things that newspapers, for instance, are not supposed to criticize very strongly. But that you just don't do that, or you're not allowed to do that, really, even though you have freedom of the press. But the important thing is that the ideas of freedom of expression and thought, individual liberation, equality of the sexes, and a secularization of education and a secularization of the law. I should actually just mention, it may sound dramatic what I've said, but it's not dramatic enough, because we don't remember, we don't even grasp how terrible the legal systems of the 18th century and early modern, let alone medieval times, were from the perspective of groups who were not in a privileged position. If you were part of a religious minority, if you were a homosexual, if you were a woman, if you were Jewish, if you were anything, any religious minority, if you were a sailor on the ship under the control of your captain, you were completely defenseless. The law wasn't there to defend individuals. The law existed to defend privileged property. You have no idea how oppressive 18th century society was from the perspective of those who were in subordinate positions or in minority positions. It was a terrible oppression, which of course was always justified by religious authority and by tradition.
Professor Israel, thank you very much. I'm first of all must acknowledge a debt to you and your work in my attempts to come to grips with Enlightenment thinking and with what you have called Radical Enlightenment, what I've shamelessly stolen in calling the Radical Enlightenment, because it is simply the most fitting term for this time. My point is, would it not be possible also to invert the importance you give to reason in the Radical Enlightenment by saying that the Radical Enlightenment really privileges passion and uses reason in a much more instrumental way than the moderate Enlightenment. The Radical Enlightenment starts with the fact that we are not a mind that happens to have a body attached to it, which it has to rid itself of as far as possible, but that we are a body that can also think, and therefore have to live a life to maximize happiness and minimize pain.
Well, let me answer that by partly praising and partly pointing to the differences between Philipp's conception of the Radical Enlightenment and my interpretation of it. I think that in broadest outline, the two interpretations...
Professor Israel, I'm sorry to interrupt you, is a devastating critic of his critics. But I shall hand over, and thank you for your patience.